Now let's really get into it. And what I mentioned is LSU struggles away from Tiger Stadium, and sorry about that. It doesn't really have to be on the road, right? It could also be neutral site games, right? And as I mentioned, a lot in the last 2 months since we've been doing the show, is that LSU has issues in season openers. They do, right? They've lost what, 5 straight season openers, going back to 2020, where LSU lost against Mississippi State, where they allowed a SEC record 634 yards against Mississippi State in 2020. KG Costello threw the rock a bunch, and LSU allowed him to do so with ease. I mean, he had 634 passing yards, and he got benched 2 weeks later. And that's just tells you a whole lot about just LSU's bad luck in season openers. And the next year they lose to UCLA on the road. I get that the hurricane happened. I get Hurricane Ida happened, and maybe they were distracted and all that kind of stuff. But they still lost by 2 touchdowns against the UCLA team that that should have been a competitive game, and UCLA was the better team from the beginning to end. And I get that there was distractions and everything because of the hurricane, but remember Tulane, by the way, also had to deal with distractions. They were in New Orleans where the hurricane directly hit, and they still played their hearts out and nearly upset Oklahoma, who at that time was the number 1 team in the country. The following year, Brian Kelly's first year, and the UCLA game was really just I think it wasn't the beginning of the end for O, but you could kind of tell after that game, like O was not going to be the starting, was not going to be the head coach at the end of the year. You just had a feeling that wasn't going to happen. But anyway, next year, Brian Kelly, it's the start of the Brian Kelly era. You have a neutral site game against Florida State in New Orleans, basically your home field, and I'm including that in there. I know that's technically a home game, but it's still a neutral site game. It's still away from Tiger Stadium. And they lost by 1 point, 24-23. Jane Daniels went 90 plus yards down the field and threw the game tying touchdown pass, or what should have been the game tying touchdown pass, except for the fact that the extra point got blocked. And Florida State did whatever they could to give that game away. And LSU couldn't take control of the game. Next year, you go against Florida State again, but this time is a top 10 matchup. Your whole offense is coming back. Jane Daniels looks like he's primed for a breakout year, which he ultimately ended up doing. Then you also blink neighbors of Brian Thomas coming back. You had Mason Taylor coming back. You had the whole offensive line coming back. You had the whole defense coming back. Like, it just seemed like LSU was ready to get back into the elite status that it was known for, right? I mean, LSU had 3 down years. Well, 2 down years after 2019, of course, where they went 500 in 2020 and 2021. And then, obviously, the year before, they had, a overachieving year because they went 500 the last 2 years and then ended up going to SEC Championship in 2022. But in 2023, you're supposed to build off of that year. And you're supposed to build off the year, and what a way to start off the year. They get a huge win over Florida State. That didn't happen. LSU got ran out the building. They had a 17-14 lead over Florida State at halftime. And they got outscored 31-10 in the second half. Deuce Chestnut got roasted alive in Orlando. They cannot stop Florida State at all. They could not stop Keon Coleman, who, by the way, was Louisiana native. And so on and so forth. Then, of course, last year you go against a USC team, and you were the better team. You were, and you lost that one. And it was a top 25 matchup at the time. But at the end of the year, USC ended up being a bad team. As a matter of fact, the quarterback who started that game, Miller Moss, was benched. He transferred to Louisville. So in 2 out of the 5 openers, you lost against a team that benched that starter in that game. And why I'm bringing this up is because Clemson is the season opener. I know we keep harping on Clemson, and I get it, and I think people are tired of hearing about Clemson, but it is the first game of the year, so we're gonna keep talking about it. And it's also a top 10 matchup, and it could be. It is a very consequential game. It is the most consequential game. It's the most consequential non-conference game. I could say since 2023 against Florida State, but really, you might have to go back into since 2019 Texas. I think that was even more so than Florida State last year, just because. I think just because, Florida, as big as Florida State LSU was, there was a whole lot of pressure on LSU. There was pressure on LSU, but I think there was more pressure in that Texas game than it was against Florida State, in my opinion. And they're both very similar, but I think 2019 was the year where you felt like everything was on the line, just because you had this great team together. You knew they were going to be great, but you needed to prove it against a big-time team, against Texas on the road. But I guess they're very similar. I guess you could say that. So, I mean, you could say 2023, you could say 2019, doesn't matter. It is a very consequential game, but really what this leads into, and I'm sorry for this long kind of intro into what I'm supposed to talk about, is really just LSU's issues on the road, and not only just on the road, but in neutral site games. Since Brian Kelly has taken over LSU, right? Brian Kelly is 29-11. He's had a. I mean, that's not bad. It's not like, obviously I think LSU fans want higher expectations out of this team because you've won 3 national championships since the turn of the century. There's only one other team has won more, and that's Alabama. And there's only one team that is tied with you, which is Ohio State. So, yeah. But you want to be better. You want to be better than 10-3 or 9-3 or 10-4, you name it. And of those 40 games he has coached, he is 19-2 at home. The only 2 losses he had at home were against Tennessee and Alabama, which are both blowouts. We'll get to that in a second. But on the road, they are 10-9. Well, on the road or in neutral site games in the regular season, they are 10-9. They're 10-9. And against top 25 teams, he's 3-2 at Tiger Stadium, which isn't bad. You have a winning record at Tiger Stadium. But he is 1-6 away from Tiger Stadium. 1-6. So in 7 games against top 25 opponents, you are 1-6. The only one you had won was against Missouri back in 2023. And by the way, they were down 20-7 at halftime. So they had to come back from a double-digit deficit to win that game, and it took a lot for them to win against Missouri. Remember, that was when LSU went to Pete Jenkins to become the defensive line coach. They brought him out of retirement. Jane Daniels I think he had a broken rib. I remember he got hurt. He got hurt in that game, and he had to play through the pain to lead LSU back to the game. And really, if there's one game that really was Jane. I know a lot of people say the Florida game because obviously that was his flashiest game. He was the first quarterback to pass for 300 and run for another 200 in a single game. But really, that Missouri game really was probably his highest moment because he played through an injury, and on top of that, that game may have saved Brian Kelly. Like, I don't think people realize that was the game after Ole Miss where you allowed 700 yards of total offense. And by the way, on the road. We'll get to that in a second. So that was, that was his defining moment. If Jane Daniels doesn't have that performance because of Missouri in 2023, Brian Kelly is 0-7 against top 25 opponents on the road. Like, I don't think you realize how bad that is. That is horrendous. And that's something you don't want to hear from my mouth, especially when it comes to Brian Kelly, because Brian Kelly is seen as a top 10, even a top 5 coach of college football. But the one thing he's known for is not winning big games. And you have to win big games. You just have to, especially at LSU. The only way you can win a national championship or get anywhere at any Power 5, Power 4 program, you have to win the big games. It's just simple as that. And if you don't win big games, you're gonna get canned. And we saw the way Coach O after 2019 when Joe Burrow and all them went out the door. LSU went 500. Now, obviously, those are different circumstances than now, but LSU's not afraid to pull the trigger to fire their coach, especially one that's won a national championship. They done it to the last 2 coaches, Les Miles and Ed Orgeron. Both had won national championships. They were both got you on the door. And Ed Orgeron, by the way, was from here. He was, you could say, one of us. What a lot of people from Louisiana say. So, I'm not, and look, LSU's obviously not going to fire Brian Kelly this year. They're not, right? Way too much money to fire Brian Kelly. And, I mean, think about this. Like, he had $100 million. 1 second. But yeah, sorry about that. But his bio is like $100 million. So at the time he signed, so they're not going to fire him anytime soon. If they're going to fire him, it's not going to be until next year. So, this season gets determined where we see Brian Kelly for next year. But Brian, and I saw this too, and I was doing some research on it, and that's why it took me, kind of forever to do it. And I was going through the point differentials of each game, home and away, neutral. So in home games, in 2022, games were determined by 26.4 points. 2023, 32.6, and 2024, 18.7. Remember, Brian Kelly has gotten LSU has only lost 2 games. That was to Tennessee in a 27-point loss, and against Alabama in a 29-point loss. Once again, those are 2 big games. They're both top 25 games between 2 top 25 teams. Of course, Tennessee and Alabama were both in the top 10. But LSU, throughout the rest of the games, they had won. I mean, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 games that were determined by 7 points or less. Most of the games they had won were blowouts. And yes, you could say maybe some of the games are a little bit easier. But if you start looking at the away games against LSU, only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games against ranked opponents, which is about the same. I think LSU had 4 or 5 games against ranked opponents, so it's not that much of a drop off. But if you look at the point differential 2022, 2023, and 2024, 10.6 point differential 2022. 2023, you had a 12.75 point differential, and in 2024, you had a 12 point differential. And in 2022, the 2 games I mentioned that were ranked games were neutral site games. The 1 point was, of course, the Florida State game in 2022, where LSU lost on a blocked extra point. And then, of course, they lost by 20 against Georgia, who, by the way, was the best team in the country. They ended up winning that championship. Arguably one of the greatest teams of all time. I'm not saying they're a top 10, top 15, but if you look at their resume, they were a top 15 team all time. I mean, that's what they were. But the games they struggled. Look, you only won by 4 points against a bad Auburn team. They went 5-7 years. That's the year where they fired Brian Hartz in the middle of the year. They had only won by 10 points against a Florida team that ended up the season 10 6-7. And Florida had a whole lot of yards against LSU, mostly coming from Anthony Richardson. And they also had a 3-point win over Arkansas when Arkansas didn't even have their starting quarterback. And of course, Jane Daniels had all of his worst games from that year. 2023. 2 of your 3 losses were by double digits. 21-point loss against Florida State in Orlando, and a 14-point loss against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. The only single-digit loss you had was against Ole Miss, but that Ole Miss game famously was the one where you allowed a SEC record 711 yards of total offense. In the second half, 60 to 70% of Ole Miss's scoring drives were touchdowns. That was the worst defensive game LSU probably played in its history. And also that game cemented Jane Daniels' legacy, because I think that was around the time when LSU fans started to realize, oh, Jane Daniels is literally saving our asses. Go to 2024. You had a 7-point loss against USC. A game you should have won. You were the better team in the first half. You stunk the bed in the second half. And not only that, you lost against USC team that finished the season 8-5. That wasn't a very good SEC team. Not a very good USC team. And then you also lost against 50 points at A&M. You had led 17-7 at halftime against A&M on the road. And you got outscored 31-6 in the second half. And then, of course, you lost by 11 points against Florida. Six of the 8 games you lost either in road or neutral site games, you lost by double digits. LSU is a completely different team on the road. They just are under Brian Kelly. They just have been. Matter of fact, if you look back at 2023, the defense only allowed 19.7 points per game. Yes, that 2023 defense only allowed 19.7 points per game. But when they were on the road, 37.7 points per game. I mean, they were a completely different team. I mean, it was absolutely insane. As a matter of fact, they allowed nearly 500 yards of total offense on the road in 2023. And yes, while Blake Baker's Blake Baker made some improvements last year, but even last year, the defense looked completely different on the road. And I get that a lot of teams struggle on the road. I get that. That's why it's called home field advantage. But at a certain point, when you lose 6 of the 8 games you have lost away from Tiger Stadium under Brian Kelly have been double digits, it's not about, oh yeah, you're away from your home stadium, so you're going to struggle. No, it's more about you have a coach who still has not won big games in his entire career. And I like Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly's a great coach. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame, right? He's won at every single place he has been at. Every single one. He won multiple national championships at the Division II level of Grand Valley State. He goes to Central Michigan. Central Michigan had been poo. They weren't a very good MAC school. They were one of the worst teams in the MAC before he got there. His last year there in 2006, they won the MAC championship. Goes to Cincinnati. Had 10+ win seasons in all 3 years at Cincinnati and led Cincinnati to 2 BCS bowl games. Goes to Notre Dame. Notre Dame had not been relevant since the early to mid 1990s. By his third year, he leads them to the national championship game with the undefeated regular season. And of course, we all know about how it ended. He went 45-9, I think 45-6, whatever. They had from 2017 to 2021, they had 10 wins every single year, including 2 playoff appearances. Like, he's won at every single place he's been at, right? He's even won at LSU. But at a certain point, when is enough enough? When is enough enough? This Clemson game will determine whether or not LSU's a playoff team this year. If they win this game against Clemson on the road to open up the season, then I think LSU's a playoff team. I really do. But if they lose this game against Clemson, then all the pressure's on them. Ole Miss and Alabama are on the road. There's no guarantee you're going to win one. You're going to win both. You're going to win one. And they very well could lose both of them. Yes, South Carolina and Florida and A&M are in Tiger Stadium this upcoming season. But that doesn't mean they're going to win either of them. That doesn't mean they're going to win all 3 of them. The SEC is a very tough conference. We just saw Alabama lose against Vanderbilt last year. We've seen A&M lose against a very bad Auburn team. We've also seen LSU and Ole Miss in back-to-back weeks, both top 25 teams, lose against Florida on the road by double digits, and that Florida team was fighting for bowl eligibility. The SEC is a tough conference. It just is. It's now a dog-eat-dog conference. And if you don't win that game against Clemson, it's going to be rough sledding for the rest of the season. LSU will not only not make the playoff, but there's a good chance that they could finish the season 8-4 again. Because the SEC is always tough. You just don't know what's going to happen in the SEC where everyone hates each other. They all want to beat each other up. I'm not saying LSU's an 8-4 team or a 7-5 team. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying is, if they lose this game to Clemson, the pressure's on them. And it will keep adding up. It just is. If you win that game against Clemson, it will get a little bit easier, right? And the pressure wouldn't be on. The pressure's always on. The pressure's always on for LSU. But if you lose that game against Clemson, the pressure should make diamonds, but in this point, it's going to make LSU look like poo-poo. Because it's not going to look too great for LSU. Because guess what? Game 3 of the season, by the way, you have Florida. In the first 5 to 6 games of the year, you have Clemson, Florida, and Ole Miss. And then, of course, you got South Carolina, and then you got Alabama, you got A&M, like Oklahoma. You also have Oklahoma on the road, right? I know Oklahoma didn't have a great season last year, but playing in Norman's a very tough place to play. It just is. Matter of fact, speaking of how hard it is to win the SEC, we also saw Alabama get ran out the stadium against an Oklahoma team that also was fighting for bowl eligibility. If they don't win that game against Alabama, they're not going to make a bowl game that year. That wasn't a very good Oklahoma team. Now, I think they should be better. They got a new offensive coordinator coming in. John Mateer was a solid quarterback at Washington State. Way better than Jackson Arnold. But the ultimate point is, nothing's guaranteed. If LSU wants to be a playoff team, they want to be among the lead, they want to win a national championship, under Brian Kelly, you have to win away from Tiger Stadium. I think it's awesome that LSU's 19-2 under Brian Kelly. I think that's great. Although those 2 losses were by double digits, 20 plus point losses, 19-2 is a hell of a record. However, the fact that you're 10-9 in regular season games away from Tiger Stadium, whether that's a neutral site game on the road, that is very concerning. And it also doesn't help that that game against Clemson is not in Tiger Stadium. It's in the other Death Valley in Clemson, South Carolina. It just is. Let's go over some comments. E-Dub, 4. Gotta win game 1. Absolutely. When you lose game 1, it makes for a shitty first month of the season. Yeah, it does. That's not going to lose either. Kappa Man, Iceman, can you kind of clarify that? I think that may have been a typo. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but yeah, that's the ultimate point. You have to win game 1.